Story 1. The ghost in my sister's room watched me every night for a year. My sister Emma died when I was 11 years old. She was 14. A car accident on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She never made it to the hospital. One moment she existed in the world, and the next she simply did not. And the space she left behind was enormous, in the way that only the loss of a child can be enormous. Our house became a different place after that. Quieter, heavier, like the air itself had thickened with grief. My parents kept her room exactly as it was. Her clothes still in the dresser, her posters still on the walls, her school books still stacked on the desk, as if she might come home any afternoon and sit down to do homework. I understood why they did it. I didn't go in there. For months after she died, and I walked past her closed door every day and I did not go in. The first time I saw her was 6 months after the accident. I woke up at some point deep in the night, and there was a light under Emma's door. Not a bright light, a dim, pale, cold light, the color of winter moonlight, coming from beneath the gap at the bottom of the door. I lay in my bed across the hall and stared at it. My parents were asleep. No one had gone into Emma's room. The overhead light in there was off when my parents closed it each night. I had watched my mother do it. The same ritual every evening. Door opened, light checked, door closed. There was no source for the light I was seeing. I watched it for a long time. It didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just that steady, cold, pale glow beneath the door. Then the door opened, not violently, and not dramatically. It simply swung inward, slowly, the way a door opens when someone on the other side turns the handle and pushes. And standing in the doorway, lit from behind by that cold, sourceless light, was Emma. Not as she had looked in the accident, as she had looked every ordinary day of her life, her hair pulled back, the oversized sweatshirt she wore on weekends, her feet bare. She looked solid, real, more real somehow than the darkness around her. She was standing in the doorway of her room, and she was looking directly at me across the hallway. I could not move. I could not make a sound. I lay in my bed, and I looked at my dead sister, and she looked back at me, and neither of us moved for what felt like a very long time. Then she raised one hand, not a wave, more a gesture of acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge someone across a distance when words won't carry. Slow and deliberate and calm. And then she stepped back into her room, and the door closed. The light under the door went out. I did not sleep again that night. I lay in the dark with my heart hammering against my ribs, and I stared at Emma's door until the sun came up, and the house filled with ordinary morning sounds. And my mother came downstairs and made coffee, and the world pretended to be normal again. I saw Emma 7 more times over the following year, always at night, always in the doorway of her room, always that same cold, pale light. She never spoke. She never came into the hallway. Here she stood in her doorway, and she looked at me across the dark space between our rooms. And sometimes she raised her hand in that slow, deliberate gesture, and sometimes she simply stood and watched until she stepped back and the door closed. The 8th time was different. I had grown braver by then, or perhaps more desperate for contact, which amounts to the same thing. When her door opened, I got out of bed. I crossed the hallway on bare feet, my heart slamming, and I stood in front of her door, and I looked at her from 3 feet away, instead of across the hall. She was close enough that I could see her face clearly. Her eyes, and this is the detail that has stayed with me for 20 years. The detail I cannot think about without my hands starting to shake. Her eyes were completely black, and not the normal dark brown they had been in life. black all the way through. No iris, no white, just dense, lightless black that seemed to go back much further than a human eye should go. She looked at me with those eyes, and she raised her hand one last time. Then she stepped back, and the door closed, and the light went out. I never saw her again after that night. I've spent 20 years trying to decide what she was trying to tell me every time she raised that hand. Whether it was goodbye, whether it was a warning, whether it was something else entirely that I was too young and too frightened to understand. I still don't know. But I have never once in 20 years believed that what I saw was a dream or a hallucination or a trick of a grieving child's mind. I know what I saw. I know she was there. Story 2. The figure at the end of the hospital corridor would not stop walking toward me. I worked the night shift as a janitor in a large regional hospital for 3 years. I want to be upfront about what that job involves, because the setting matters. Empty corridors at 2 in the morning, fluorescent lights that hum and occasionally flicker, the particular institutional silence of a building where people are sleeping or dying, or somewhere between the two. You get used to it. The strangeness becomes normal. The sounds and shadows that would terrify a visitor become background noise to someone who works there every night. I got used to almost everything that hospital had to offer. I never got used to the figure on the 4th floor. Yep, the 4th floor was the oldest wing of the building, a section that predated the rest of the hospital by several decades, with narrower corridors and lower ceilings, and a persistent smell of something antiseptic and old that the newer sections didn't have. It wasn't my favorite floor to work on, but it was on my rotation, and I did it without complaint. The first time I saw the figure, I was mopping the far end of the main corridor, working my way back toward the elevator bank. It was approximately 2:15 in the morning. The corridor stretched about 150 feet ahead of me, lit by the overnight fluorescence, dimmer than daytime, casting everything in a flat gray light. At the far end of the corridor, at the absolute limit of my sight line, a figure appeared, tall, dressed in dark clothing, walking toward me. But my first thought was a visitor, a family member who'd been allowed to stay overnight with a patient. It happened sometimes. I moved my mop cart to the side to let the person pass and kept working. But the figure did not reach me. I looked up after a minute, and the corridor ahead was empty. The figure had been walking toward me. I had watched it take clear, measured steps, and now it was simply gone. No doors had opened. There were no intersecting hallways between us. The corridor was straight and long and fully visible, and the figure had vanished from it while I was watching. I told myself I was tired. 12 hours into a shift, low light, eyes playing tricks. I finished the floor and went on with my night. 3 weeks later it happened again. Same corridor, same time, approximately. Same figure at the far end. The same measured walk toward me. This time I put my mop down, and I watched it without looking away, without blinking if I could help it. I watched it cross half the distance between us, 70 feet, maybe 75, and then it stopped. It stood in the middle of the corridor, and it was still, and it was looking at me. I could not see its face clearly from that distance, in that light, but the quality of its attention was unmistakable. It had stopped because it knew I was watching. It was looking back. We stood like that for almost 2 minutes. I counted my own heartbeats because I needed something to hold on to. It did not move. It did not fade or flicker or do anything cinematic. It simply stood in the fluorescent gray light of that old corridor and looked at me across 70 feet of linoleum floor. But then it turned around and walked back the way it had come, slowly, deliberately, and it walked directly into the wall at the end of the corridor, without slowing down, without stopping, and was gone. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning. He listened with no particular expression and then asked me which floor. When I told him the 4th floor, he nodded slowly and said 2 other staff members had reported something similar over the past year. He said facilities management had checked the electrical system, checked for carbon monoxide, found nothing. He said as far as he knew it was harmless. He said that like it was a policy position he had arrived at after careful consideration. I saw the figure 11 more times over my remaining 2 years on that job. Always the 4th floor, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, and always that same measured walk toward me, that same stop at the midpoint of the corridor, that same long stillness while it looked at me across the space between us. The last time I saw it, my final week before I left for a different job, it did something it had never done before. Instead of walking back into the wall at the end, it stopped halfway through its retreat. It turned around one more time and faced me. And in the low gray light of that old corridor, from 50 feet away, I finally saw its face, clearly enough to understand why I had never been able to make it out before. It did not have one. Not a featureless blur. Not darkness where a face should be. The front of its head was simply smooth, the same pale gray as the rest of it, unbroken, no features of any kind. It stood there long enough to make sure I had seen. Then it walked into the wall and I never saw it again. I still don't go to hospitals at night if I can help it, and I never work the late shift anymore. Not anywhere. Story number 3. Whatever was in that cabin had been dead for a very long time. 4 of us rented the cabin for a long weekend in October. It was deep in the woods, no neighbors, no cell signal past the turnoff 2 miles down the dirt road. The kind of deliberately isolated rental that sounds romantic until you're actually there at 11 at night, with the trees pressing in on every side and the darkness outside the windows, absolute and total. We arrived on Friday evening. The cabin was exactly as advertised. Rustic, clean, well-stocked. 2 bedrooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen, a back porch overlooking a shallow creek. We got the fire going, opened the drinks we'd brought, and settled in. Everything was fine. The smell was the first thing. Not immediately. It started sometime after midnight, and after the fire had died down, and we'd all drifted towards sleep. I woke up because of it. A smell unlike anything I have clean words for. The closest I can get is something long dead and enclosed. The smell of a space where something has been decomposing in the absence of air for a very long time. It was faint at first, something at the edge of perception, and then it wasn't faint at all. I woke my boyfriend. He smelled it immediately, no prompting. We assumed an animal had gotten under the cabin and died there. Unfortunate, but not supernatural. It happens with old structures in the woods. We opened a window and tried to go back to sleep. At 3:17 a.m., I know the time because I checked my phone when the sound woke me. Something walked across the roof. Not an animal. Plus, I need to be very clear about this because I know that's the easy explanation. I have heard squirrels on a roof, raccoons on a roof, once a deer on a low-pitched roof. This was not that. This was bipedal. 2 feet, human spacing, human weight distribution. Something walking upright across the roof of the cabin at 3:17 in the morning, from one end to the other, slowly, with the unhurried deliberateness of something that did not care whether we heard it. All 4 of us were awake by the time it reached the far end of the roof. We sat in the living room with every light on. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then my friend Dana said very quietly that she thought we should leave. Nobody disagreed. We started gathering things. That was when we heard it on the porch. The back porch, the one overlooking the creek. Any footsteps on the wooden boards, slow and heavy, moving from one end of the porch to the other, then stopping. Then after a long silence, the sound of something pressing against the back door. Not knocking, not trying the handle, just a sustained pressure against the door, as though something very large and very heavy was leaning against it from the outside. The door held. We did not approach it. We spent the next 2 hours huddled in the living room, waiting for dawn. The sounds moved around the exterior of the cabin periodically. Footsteps on the porch, something dragging along the outer wall, twice more on the roof. The smell intensified around 4 in the morning to the point where 2 of us were gagging, and then faded as quickly as it had come. When the sky started to lighten, we got in the cars and left. Here we did not go back for the items we'd left inside. We left sleeping bags, clothing, food, a good camera. None of us suggested going back. I contacted the rental company on Monday. I described what we had experienced. The woman I spoke to was polite and patient, in the specific way of someone managing a conversation they have had before. She said wildlife encounters were common in that area. She said the cabin was inspected regularly. She said she was sorry we'd had a frightening experience. I asked if anyone had reported similar things before. She said she wasn't able to share information about other guests' experiences, which is not the same as saying no. We've looked up that area since. The woods surrounding the cabin have a history. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing that makes regional news, but a pattern of things over many decades. Hikers who reported sounds. A hunting party in the 1970s who abandoned their camp in the middle of the night and refused to say why. A local family who sold their property bordering those woods in the 1990s and moved 4 states away. I don't know what walked on that roof. I don't know what pressed itself against that door for 20 minutes at 4 in the morning while we sat inside and held our breath. I know that it was large. I know that it moved like something that had once been human and no longer quite was. And I know that the smell that came with it was the smell of something that had been dead for a very long time, but that was still somehow impossibly moving through those woods in the dark. We have never gone back. None of us go camping anymore.